Hi, it's me, the storyteller. Thank you for joining me. Most of my stories on this channel are based on actual events, and some aren't. I'll let you decide if these stories are fiction, or if they're not. Ozark, Missouri had a way of folding into itself once autumn arrived. The trees lit up in fire-colored leaves, and the air turned cool and sweet like apple cider. The town's rhythm slowed just enough to notice the crunch of leaves underfoot, the smell of distant bonfires, and the way headlights shimmered against low-hanging fog. In this particular October evening in 2018, it was homecoming night, the kind of night meant for nostalgia in the making. 4 teenage girls had just left the high school football field, still buzzing with school spirit and the kind of youthful energy that came from feeling like the night belonged only to them. Bethany Mills was at the wheel of her matte black Jeep Wrangler, the de facto ride for her tight-knit circle. Kara Kramer rode shotgun, with Mariah Collins and Shanice Taylor in the back seat, heads leaning out the windows, hair tangled in the breeze. The parking lot had been a chaos of taillights and teenagers, so Shanice mentioned they should take the scenic route home, back roads that wound through woods and fields. Bethany agreed that it wasn't about saving time. It was about dragging the night out just a little longer. The girls weren't in any rush to return to real life. Their music played loud enough to drown out the wind, and for a while, the Jeep was a capsule of joy, speeding down Cades Road. But somewhere in the spaces between the songs and laughter, something changed. Bethany had spotted a red Honda Civic in her rearview mirror, about 10 minutes back. Close enough to notice, but not quite alarming. At first, she hadn't thought much of it. Country roads didn't offer many options for other drivers, but as the turns came and went, the Civic remained behind them, mirroring each swerve like a shadow stitched to their bumper. The girls were in mid-conversation when Bethany's attention snapped to the mirror again, her smile faltering. She turned down the music. The sudden silence cut through their joy, and for a moment, confusion lingered. Mariah made a comment about the mood shift, but it was Shanice who noticed Bethany's tension. Bethany brought up the Honda Civic behind them. Kara tried to dismiss it, insisting it was probably nothing, just another car headed in the same direction. But Shanice had grown up hearing stories from her father, a former military mechanic who drilled survival tactics into her head. She remembered one in particular. If you think someone's following you, make 5 random turns. No normal person will follow every single one. So Bethany put it to the test. 1 turn, then another. Right, left, right again. No matter how absurd the route became, the car following them was always there. Headlights slicing through the dark like they had purpose. Panic crept in. They weren't being paranoid. They were being stalked. The girls exchanged looks, their excitement from earlier now rotting into anxiety. Bethany's hands gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles pale. Kara tried to suggest slowing down, hoping the Civic would pass. But when they did slow down, it slowed too, maintaining its distance like it was studying them. The road narrowed, and the tall pines that bordered either side began to sway with the promise of incoming rain. Overhead, clouds boomed like bruises in the sky, and far-off thunder murmured low and ominous. Then, without warning, the Jeep's dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. Alarms beeped. Warning lights flared. The engine coughed once, then died. The vehicle rolled to a halt on the shoulder, headlights flickering. Bethany turned the key. Nothing. No power, no sound, not even the hazard lights worked. It was as if the heart of the Jeep had been ripped out. They sat in stunned silence, trying their phones, but no one had a signal. In fact, all of their phones were curiously dead, as if their cell phone batteries ran out at the same time. The Civic rolled to a stop about 50 feet behind them. Bethany asked if anyone could see who was inside, but no one could. A second later, the Civic's high beams exploded into the night, flooding the Jeep's interior with a blinding white light. The silhouettes behind the glass vanished. All they could see was the glare. Then came the sound of rain. Slow, deliberate raindrops tapping the windshield. Tension cracked. One of the girls screamed. Kara's breath came in shallow gasps as panic overtook her. Bethany slammed her horn, holding it for 10 seconds straight, but the Civic answered back, matching hers with a long, blaring honk that seemed to echo through the woods. Whoever it was taunting them. Then, without explanation, the Civic pulled forward, tires grinding against the wet gravel as it crept past them. But before relief could set in, it stopped ahead, made a 180 in the road, and began to creep back, stopping directly in front of the Jeep, now facing them head on. Whatever this was, it wasn't random, more deliberate. At that moment, survival overtook logic. The girls bailed from the Jeep and sprinted into the nearby field, feet trampling tall grass, legs moving faster than thought. The forest beyond loomed like a fortress of shadows. Bethany led the charge, Kara close behind, Shanice following them. They ran without looking back, but when they stopped to catch their breath at the tree line, they realized there were only 3 of them. Mariah was gone, nowhere to be seen. The trees swallowed them. Branches clawed at skin and clothes as they tore through the underbrush, fueled by panic and primal instinct. Somewhere behind them, the Civic's engine rumbled low. Bethany, Kara, and Shanice didn't stop until their chests felt hollow and their lungs like fire. When they finally turned to regroup, expecting to see all 4 of them, Mariah was still missing. What began as horror turned into disbelief. Bethany spun in circles, scanning the darkness. Kara whispered Mariah's name over and over, her voice dry and fraying. But Shanice just stood still, too still. Her eyes fixed on the tree line, as if watching something unfold that the others hadn't noticed yet. Then they saw it. Down near the road, barely visible in the distance, a tall figure trudged through the rain-soaked grass, carrying something slumped over one shoulder. The shape was unmistakable, a girl's limp frame. It was Mariah. The Civic's headlights flared again. The figure opened the back door, shoved the body inside, and climbed in. In seconds, the car disappeared down the road, swallowed by fog and rain. None of them screamed. They didn't have to. The soundless collapse of their world said it all. They ran again, this time not to escape, but to survive. Nearly an hour later, soaked to the bone and trembling, they stumbled onto a remote farmhouse, tucked behind a grove of dying oak trees. The porch light cast a dull yellow glow, and the door opened before they even knocked. An older couple, alarmed, confused, but gentle, brought them inside, wrapped them in blankets, and called for help. By the time deputies arrived, their parents were already on the way. News spread like a storm surge through the town of Ozark. A girl was missing, probably taken, maybe worse. The questioning started immediately. Inside the warmth of the farmhouse, with space heaters buzzing and rain tapping against the windows, officers tried to piece together a story that didn't make sense. They asked about the car, about the driver, the road, the Jeep, the field. The girls gave answers, some clear, others wrapped in uncertainty. Bethany described how the vehicle shut down without warning. Kara recounted how the Civic stalked them, how it never once passed. And Shanice, she played her part with quiet composure, nodding at the right moments, giving nothing away. She stayed close to Bethany's side, her tone calm but careful, almost too careful. If anyone noticed the slight delay before she spoke, the way her gaze flinched when they mentioned Mariah, they didn't say anything. Investigators towed the Jeep out the next morning. The engine was cold. Systems were unresponsive. The battery was intact, the fuel clean. Nothing made sense. Then the forensic team noted something unusual, a strange metallic scorch pattern along the vehicle's frame, like an electrical burn. It didn't match any known failure modes, and it hadn't originated from inside the Jeep. Later, a technical analyst with military experience was called in. He examined the damage and quietly suggested something few were ready to believe: an electromagnetic pulse, EMP. A military-grade EMP could kill an engine mid-drive, destroy a phone's ability to call out, even knock out modern electronics within a 2-block radius. But where would a civilian get access to something like that? The suggestion hovered like smoke in a sealed room. No one could prove it, but no one could rule it out either. By the end of the week, the missing persons case had gone national. Mariah's face smiled from flyers stapled to telephone poles, bus stops, and gas station windows. Candlelight vigils were held at the football field, where she had spent time with her friends just hours before her disappearance. Social media feeds flooded with prayers, sightings, and conspiracies. Still, there was no trace of the red Honda Civic. CCTV surveillance footage from nearby intersections turned up nothing. No license plate numbers, no witnesses. It was as if the car had never existed. Yet Bethany and Kara remained adamant. They'd seen it. They'd watched it all happen. And so had Shanice. But as time passed, small things began to gnaw at Bethany. The night after the incident, she had trouble sleeping. Her mind kept circling one detail: how calm Shanice had been when everything went wrong. How quick she was to suggest the turn test. How she had said nothing when they lost Mariah. Bethany remembered thinking at the time that maybe she was in shock. But the more she replayed that night in her mind, the more it didn't sit right. There was also the issue of Shanice's phone. When police returned the girl's belongings, Shanice's device had been completely wiped. No messages, no call logs, not even browser history. She'd claimed water damage erased everything, but Bethany had seen her clutching it protectively in the field. It hadn't been wet. It had been working earlier at the football game. They took selfies and everything. Bethany told Kara her suspicions. At first, Kara refused to believe it. Shanice had been their friend since elementary school. She would never. But then came the voicemail. A week after the incident, Mariah's mother received a call from a blocked number. She thought it was just a spam risk, but they did leave a message. She played it back. No one spoke on the line. It was just faint static, like a bad radio signal. But buried in the distortions was a voice, just a few words, quiet, strained, almost broken. It was Mariah. Could she still be alive? Or was it just some heartless prank? The voicemail was grainy and low, distorted by something synthetic, like it was scrambled deliberately. Audio experts that the family hired struggled to isolate it, but after hours of filtering and amplifying, a whisper emerged beneath the layers. It was Mariah's voice. She sounded scared, exhausted. She said only 5 words. "Don't trust Shanice. He's watching." When the audio played in the sheriff's office, no one moved. The room thickened with disbelief, suspicion, and dread. That single sentence cracked open a fault line beneath the investigation, one that had been quietly ignored until now. The officers called Bethany and Kara in for a second round of interviews. This time, the questions were tighter, focused, and personal. How long had Shanice known Mariah? Were they close? Had there ever been any tension? Bethany and Kara exchanged glances. They admitted what they had heard in the past. Shanice occasionally talked about how Mariah always seemed to be at the center of everything. Teachers loved her. Boys followed her. Even Shanice's ex, Marcus, had briefly dated Mariah a year ago. This was the first thread. Once tugged, more began to unravel. The law enforcement tech unit subpoenaed metadata from Shanice's school laptop. At first glance, her device looked clean, a little too clean. No homework assignments, social media, no emails, no browsing history. But forensic recovery tools don't need permission. They dug deeper. What they found was a rabbit hole no one expected. Weeks before the disappearance, Shanice had visited multiple anonymous message boards and private servers hosted on the dark web. The logs pointed to encrypted chats on black market forums frequented by fringe hackers, mercenaries for hire, and ex-military operatives. One username, Daggerfall, kept appearing in the threads. Conversations between Shanice and this user discussed obscure technologies, signal scramblers, cellular jammers, and most disturbingly, portable EMP emitters, devices capable of disabling vehicles and communications, illegal in all 50 states, traceable to no one. More disturbing still were the inquiries of, quote, making a person disappear. The conversations were short, calculated, but one stood out, sent just a week before homecoming. The date is set. I'll make sure she's alone. Bethany couldn't breathe when she heard the truth. Shanice had set them up. Not just Bethany or Kara, but Mariah. Specifically her. The night of the football game, Shanice had insisted they all ride together. She had also suggested the back roads, and casually mentioned stretching out the night, as if it were her idea all along. And when the mysterious car appeared, she never panicked. Bethany remembered the look on her face during the chase. No terror, no confusion, something else. It seemed to be control. The town of Ozark braced for any new updates. Within 48 hours, the FBI was called in. Armed with the metadata, chat logs, and Mariah's voicemail, they obtained a warrant and stormed Shanice's house in the early hours of the morning. Her bedroom was minimal, spotless, but inside a hollowed-out section of her closet floor, agents discovered a locked metal briefcase containing a prepaid burner phone and a laminated map of Christian County with a red X marked on a rural property north of Springfield. The FBI rushed to that location. It was an off-grid cabin, no electricity, no running water. The man living there inherited the land and disappeared from public records nearly 5 years earlier. When the agents ran the prints found on the burner phone, they matched a man with military clearance, a dishonorably discharged communications tech named Hayden Cray. The username, Daggerfall, was his. Officials scoured the off-grid cabin late that night. Hidden deep behind layers of brush, barbed wire, it sat in a silent hollow, surrounded by hand-dug trenches and motion-triggered cameras. The windows were blacked out. No visible lights. No sound. Inside, the air was stale. The place was lined with signal jammers, power inverters, and makeshift surveillance feeds showing the roads leading in. And in a small locked room in the back of the cabin, barely more than a walk-in closet, they found Mariah, disoriented, weak, but still alive. She had been kept there for 9 days. No windows, no clock, only silence and darkness interrupted by the low buzz of electronics and the occasional voice outside the door. Shanice's voice. She had visited twice, not to comfort, not to feed her, just to look at her, to remind her that this was punishment, that she finally understood what it was like to be invisible. Around the 5-day mark of Mariah's ordeal, Hayden had allowed her to use the restroom. Apparently, he had gotten distracted by something on the cameras. He ran outside to investigate. He had left his cell phone on the counter. That's when Mariah took the opportunity to call her mother. That's when she left the voicemail. Soon after Mariah's rescue, Shanice was arrested on multiple counts of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and aggravated endangerment. Hayden Cray faced federal charges for the use of classified technology and unlawful detainment, plus aggravated endangerment of a minor. Months later, the courtroom was packed for the first hearing. Shanice didn't have any emotion. She didn't even look at her friends. In fact, she didn't speak at all. But later, in a recorded psychiatric evaluation, she finally admitted why she'd done it. She said she was tired of being the background character of her own life, tired of Mariah's perfect image, her perfect smile, the way people bent around her like gravity. The plan wasn't supposed to go that far. She just wanted to scare her, humiliate her, show her what powerlessness feels like. But then Hayden offered more: a safe house, a clean job, a chance to make it permanent. Shanice's jealousy was too great. She couldn't resist, and Ozark would never be the same. The fields where they once played, the hangout areas in high school, the football games, everything looked different now. Dimmer, quieter. People whispered, locked their doors earlier, watched their children more closely. Mariah eventually transferred schools. Bethany and Kara visited her often, but something had changed in all of them. An innocence had been taken, not just by the terror of the night, but by the realization that the greatest danger hadn't come from the outside. It had been sitting beside them all along. Months passed. Spring returned to Ozark, brushing new green all over the hills and back roads that had once been soaked in fear. People smiled again at gas stations, restaurants, and school resumed its rhythms. Time, as it always does, moved forward, but not for everyone. Mariah still had trouble sleeping, afraid of what silence might hide. She sometimes woke up gasping, convinced she could still hear the faint hum of electronics and the low shuffle of footsteps behind the wall. Bethany's Jeep sat untouched in her parents' garage. Her father refused to sell it, said it might be evidence someday, even though it already told its story. And Kara? She didn't talk much anymore. She started writing poetry no one else read. She became a recluse. But it was Shanice that haunted them all. Her trial ended in a conviction, as did Hayden Cray. They both would serve decades. And yet, sometimes, just sometimes, Mariah swore she still saw Shanice in a crowd, behind her at the grocery store, sitting 2 rows back at church, always watching, just out of focus. It was irrational, impossible. But fear doesn't need facts to exist. It only needs a shadow, a whisper, a glance held too long. On one sunny day in the summer of 2019, Mariah received a letter in the mail. It had no return address, but inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed her sleeping in that closet where she was kept for 9 days, blurred and washed in twilight. Curiously, she flipped the photo over, and what was written on the back shook her to the core. In scribbled handwriting were 3 words: "We weren't finished." It was a balmy summer evening in 1956 when Flight 513, a routine domestic route operated by Northwest Airlines, took off from Toronto en route to Vancouver. The aircraft, a sturdy Lockheed L-188 Electra, was carrying 40 passengers and 6 crew members, a mix of families, business people, and travelers seeking adventure. The flight was piloted by Captain James Caldwell, a seasoned aviator with over 5,000 hours of flight time. As the plane ascended, the sun cast a warm glow across the sky. Laughter and conversation filled the cabin in what was expected to be a smooth flight across the vast expanses of Canada. Little did they know that this flight would etch its name in the annals of aviation history for all the wrong reasons. Within hours of takeoff, communication from Flight 513 fell eerily silent. Attempts to reach the airliner went unanswered, and radar by either Canada nor the United States could locate the aircraft. By all intents and purposes, it seemed to vanish into thin air. Search and rescue missions scoured the skies and the ground, but nothing surfaced. No wreckage, no distress signals, just silence. The families of the passengers were left in a state of torment. grappling with uncertainty and fear. It was as if Flight 513 had been swallowed by the Earth itself. 26 years later, on a fog-laden afternoon in June 1982, an unexpected phenomenon disrupted the tranquil skies over British Columbia. A weathered Lockheed L-188 Electra emerged from the mists, its outline ghostly but unmistakable. As it ascended towards the Vancouver airport, the air traffic controllers were taken aback. Shock turned from confusion to panic as the plane landed without incident. Flight 513 had miraculously returned. Emergency crews braced themselves for whatever awaited them, their breath caught in their throats as the cabin door swung open. The scene inside was surreal. The plane was intact, but all the passengers, 20 years older than they appeared, yet not a single one of them alive, were gripped in their seats. Skeletal remains dressed in the clothes that they had worn that fateful day in 1956. News reporters quickly flooded the scene, cameras whirring, as local authorities assembled a team to investigate this unbelievable occurrence. No one could figure out how the plane actually landed on its own. Working alongside the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, Dr. Emily Hastings, a forensic anthropologist and self-proclaimed skeptic of supernatural events, arrived to inspect the plane. She stepped gingerly on board, examining the remnants of lives lost, every detail revealing a story yet to be told. How or why had they returned? After years of searching for answers, the mystery of Flight 513 finally beckoned. As Dr. Hastings examined the aircraft, something caught her attention. A tin box tucked beneath one of the passenger's seats. With bated breath, she opened it, revealing a collection of items: wallets, letters, photographs, all belonging to the passengers and crew that had boarded that tragic flight. At the bottom of the tin box was a small diary. Its pages, aged and yellowing, captured her attention. Dr. Hastings flipped the pages, and scribbled on the last entry were fevered notes reading, "We're trapped in a storm that seems to bend time. Passengers are becoming restless. We can't escape. Food is running out. Many have died. Those of us still alive, still holding on to hope." Dr. Hastings' hair stood on end. Could these words bridge the gap between the realms of the living and the dead? She sought out local Native American elders who spoke of sky spirits and sacred storms capable of bending reality itself. They believed that the souls of the passengers had been caught in a type of time loop, destined to replay their final moments until they came to terms with their untimely fates. Was it an accident, or had something more sinister transpired? Although the case went cold, Dr. Hastings never gave up her search for answers, but unfortunately she passed away in 2022, never knowing what happened to the ill-fated flight. In recent time, new fascination with the story of Flight 513 has found the next generation of enthusiasts, rekindling interest in Dr. Hastings' research, hoping that one day the truth will be revealed. But for now, the mystery continues to hold its secrets. In 2017, an 18-year-old college student, Drake Marin, was attending his first semester at a local community college in the quaint city of Eugene, Oregon. He and his mother Tanya were getting acclimated to their new home and the routines of living in a new environment. What awaited them was a series of chilling events that straddled the line between haunting nightmares and reality itself. Drake's father passed away in active military duty when he was only 3, and with being an only child, he and his mother had a very close relationship. After losing her husband, Tanya focused on her career so she could raise Drake and give him the best life she thought possible. A couple of weeks after moving into their new place, Drake began having nightmares. He believed the bad dreams were just a byproduct of moving to a new area of town, or the change from high school to college and the stress it can cause. He felt it would eventually pass in time, so he kept it to himself, not to worry his mother. As days passed, Drake's nightmares became more vivid and interactive. He would awake in a cold sweat, laying in odd positions on his bed, and sometimes standing up in his room, his closet, or even the hallway. But what he noticed most about his nightmares was a reoccurring but disturbing figure that appeared in every dream. A man donning a burlap sack over his head, with small holes cut out for the eyes. He wore a clad, ill-fitted dark suit and seemed to only appear from a distance, watching and observing him. The man would loom at Drake's school, at the mall, or at the movies with friends, but could only be seen by Drake. With every dream, the next one revealed the burlap man even closer than before, causing the nightmares to become more intense and scarier than the previous one. One particular night, Tanya was working late, so Drake made some Hot Pockets, turned on some music, and decided to research bad dreams on his laptop, and discovered some alarming consistencies. He found many people experienced night terrors after moving into older homes located in areas with a deep-rooted history. Their home was built in the 1970s, but had been completely remodeled. Plus, it was in a gentrified area, so everything felt fresh and new. Drake ran his hands down his face and sat back on his bed, thinking he was probably wasting his time. Just then, there was a loud knock at the front door. Startled, Drake sat up and moved down the hallway to the top of the stairs. He wasn't expecting anyone, plus it was after 9 p.m. He waited. The knock came again. The front door was flanked by two thin windows, so he tried to position himself to see if he could make out the person standing on the other side. Whoever it was must have been standing very close to the door. A third knock came. Drake moved apprehensively down the stairs and crept up to the door. He called out,
"Who is it?"
But there was no response. He hesitantly leaned toward the peephole and looked through it, but he couldn't see anyone. In fact, it was dark, as if whoever it was covered the peephole with their finger. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He shook it off and took a deep breath. Then he turned on the porch light and looked through the peephole again. It was clear. He could see the porch and further out into the street, but no one was there. What he did next was probably ill-advised in retrospect. He slowly unlocked and opened the door, then stepped cautiously onto the porch. It was quiet, with no trace of anyone. He thought it may have been just a couple of kids messing around, so he went back inside and mindfully locked the door. He assumed he'd allowed himself to get a little worked up, considering his recent dreams and what he had just researched on the internet. Drake's mother returned home about an hour later, so he decided to tell her what had happened at the front door. Tanya, a bit troubled, suggested they get one of those doorbell cameras, so she immediately hopped on Amazon and ordered one. She noticed Drake's tired eyes and asked him if he'd been sleeping well. Drake considered telling her about his dreams, but instead, he made something up like he'd been gaming late at night. She accepted the answer with a little disappointment, then kissed him on the forehead, suggesting he go to bed and get some rest. As Drake walked away, Tanya watched him with concerned eyes. The next day, Drake woke up a little later than he'd liked, but he felt refreshed. He hadn't had any dreams that night, which put him in good spirits. His class at the community college started in 25 minutes, so he rushed out of the house without breakfast. It was cloudy with a light drizzle when he arrived at school, a typical day in Oregon during the winter. When Drake made it to his class, he noticed the lecture had already started, so he made his way up the set of stairs to find a seat. As he moved to an open spot, he felt all eyes in the room were on him, including his professor. He sat down in the back row of the lecture hall and watched everyone turn back to the front slowly and in unison. This seemed odd to him. He pulled his laptop from his backpack, sat it in front of him, and opened it up. The screen lit up with a video image. It was from the very room he was sitting in, but from the point of view behind Drake, looking over his shoulder. Then the image began to zoom into where he was sitting. He swiveled in his chair to look at the wall behind him, but he couldn't see a camera mounted anywhere. He turned back to his laptop and tried closing out the window, but the image remained. He tried rebooting, but the computer wasn't responding. He noticed the image was definitely focused on him, But then the camera image started to tilt upward, revealing his professor lecturing the class. That's when he realized it wasn't his professor. It was the burlap man. Drake shot his head up, and to his horror, the burlap man was looking straight toward him. The entire class turned around to stare at him, just like before. There was a long pause. Then, the burlap man began to walk slowly up the steps toward Drake. Drake stood quickly, knocking his laptop to the ground, simultaneously jolting awake in his bed. Heart pounding, shirt drenched in sweat. Drake had indeed been dreaming. After getting dressed, he met his mother downstairs, who had prepared his breakfast. But Drake wasn't hungry. He sat at the kitchen bar, playing with his food and scrolling on his phone, trying to understand what was going on with him, and if this moment was his reality or just another dream. Tanya snapped her fingers, waking him from his daze. Knowing something wasn't quite right with her son, Tanya cornered Drake with questions until he finally broke down and told her about his nightmares. This caused her a little grief, but reassured him it was probably all of the changes going on. She told him she would pick him up something from the pharmacy to help him sleep before she shuffled out of the house. Drake sighed, pushed his food away, and left for class. The day went by a little slower than usual. Drake couldn't focus in his classes and was becoming more paranoid. As he walked across campus, he caught glimpses of the burlap man, stepping behind a tree, disappearing in the crowd, and on the drive home, crossing the street in front of him at a stoplight. His fear was rising, and when he arrived home, he quickly locked the front door and peered out of the window through the shutters. A voice came from behind him. "What are you looking at?" Drake jumped in response and whipped his head around to see it was his mother. He said it was nothing and was getting ready to head upstairs when Tanya stopped him to show him the new doorbell camera. She shared the mobile app and took him through signing in so he could see the live image. He couldn't deny the image looked a little creepy, but it put him at ease knowing he could see anyone that came to the door. Later that night, after dinner, Tanya stopped by Drake's room to give him some melatonin she purchased from the drugstore earlier that day. She explained it would help him have a better night's sleep. Drake got ready for bed and was brushing his teeth in his bathroom. He leaned over to spit in the sink, and when he rose up, the burlap man was in the reflection of the mirror behind him. He turned around to face the man, but he was gone. He turned back, and he had also disappeared from the mirror. Again, he contemplated whether this was real or he was asleep. He had an idea. He dug in his sink cabinet and found a safety pin. He opened it up and poked the palm of his hand. He recoiled, feeling the pain. He believed he was awake. After retreating to his bedroom, he took the melatonin his mother had left him, shut off his light, and got into bed. Drake stared at the ceiling for what seemed like half an hour, until his eyes got heavy and finally slipped into a deep sleep. Sometime during the night, a sound of a heartbeat filled Drake's room. He felt cold. Had his mother changed the thermostat? No. His bed comforter had fallen on the floor, along with his sheets. Something felt strange. He realized he couldn't move. He felt constricted, pressed against his mattress. His eyes were heavy, but he was able to force them open a little wider. Fear engulfed his heart by what he saw. The burlap man was in Drake's room, standing over him at the foot of his bed, lit only by a sliver of light. Drake tried to break free of the paralysis, but it was no use. He felt the burlap man in control. Was it some kind of spell? He watched as the burlap man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. It was a small cardboard tag with a rubber band, like the ones used in a morgue to identify the deceased. The burlap man bent down and attached the tag to one of Drake's toes. Drake tried to scream, but his mouth was sealed. All he could do was breathe, and that was becoming more difficult. Suddenly, Drake felt the pressure release from his body against the mattress, but the constriction remained. His rigid body began to rise, levitating toward the ceiling. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the burlap man doing something else. He was meticulously implanting large spikes in the mattress, with the sharp ends pointing upward. This process took what seemed like an hour. With no warning, Drake began to lower toward his now spike-filled bed. He felt powerless. He couldn't move or scream. Then his body dropped hard and fast into the spikes. Darkness. Morning came, and as Tanya brushed her teeth, she absent-mindedly scrolled through her phone notifications and stumbled upon a video alert from her doorbell camera, time-stamped at 3:48 a.m. Curiously, but with a hesitant finger, she pressed play. The screen flickered to life to reveal their front door and porch area. 2 seconds passed, and a shadowy figure, wearing a burlap sack on their head, emerged from their home. Tanya stood frozen as she watched the figure step onto the porch and walk a straight line toward the street. As soon as the figure passed the streetlight, there was a flicker in the image, and the person was gone. Tanya gasped and thought of Drake. She rushed out of her room and down the hall. When she reached Drake's room, she burst in. Drake was gone. Had he left early? That would have been uncharacteristic, so she glanced out of the window and noticed his car was still parked in the driveway. She walked to the end of the hallway near the stairs and called out for him. Silence. She walked back to his bedroom and just stood with her arms crossed, confused, her mind racing with the most disturbing possibilities. That's when she noticed something she didn't initially see. A deep imprint of Drake's body pressed into the bedsheets. Tanya stepped closer to inspect it. It appeared as if Drake had simply vanished. The room, which should have held signs of life, echoed with an unsettling silence. The air thickened with fear, and a disturbing sense of loss filled Tanya's heart. In that crushing moment, she felt an overwhelming darkness engulf her soul, her instincts reeling of the thought of her son's absence. As the situation spiraled out of control, Tanya found herself consumed by terror, panic tightening its grip around her chest. Suddenly, she was pulled from the abyss of her fears, awakening in a jolt, gasping for air. As she looked around her own bedroom, the totality of the scene settled upon her. What had transpired was merely a nightmare. She threw her covers off of her, jumped out of bed, and shuffled down the hall to Drake's room. She opened the door, and with a sigh of relief, Drake was sleeping safely in his bed, nestled within the waking realm of normalcy, free from the shadows that had haunted her. Tanya slowly and quietly sat on the edge of Drake's bed. She closed her eyes, pondering her dream. As she recollected more details of the nightmare, it was becoming clear. Her memory flashed from that fateful night Drake heard the knock at the door, to seeing the burlap man in his classroom, to installing the doorbell camera. Wait, she hadn't purchased that camera. None of what transpired over the last few weeks was real. This was her vivid nightmare. A long, tortuous bad dream, not Drake's. In the following weeks, Tanya and Drake began attending a local church where they both were able to get some much-needed counseling. Tanya discovered she was still harboring the loss of her husband and learning to understand her new role as a single mother. Her deep-seated love for Drake and the combined fear of losing him resulted in her carrying a weight of anxiety she could not bear alone. Although the grief has never fully gone away, Tanya's nightmares have, as both her and her son Drake are healing with every passing day. This surreal narrative ultimately beckons us to question the nature of our nightmares. Are they mere remnants of a restless mind, or could they be windows into a deeper truth, waiting for us to decipher? In the year 1947, Texarkana, a small city straddling the Texas-Arkansas border, bore witness to a chilling event that would haunt a family and community for generations. Oscar Mills, a World War II veteran, returned home to a life far removed from the grandeur of battle. After being injured in action, he found solace in the embrace of family, but the echoes of war still lingered in his heart. Despite the bitterness of having witnessed the horrors of combat, Oscar was determined to reconnect with his simpler joys. One fateful weekend, he and his brother Raymond Mills set out on a hunting trip near Dirks Lake, where the rugged terrain promised adventure and the thrill of the hunt. Little did they know that their excursion would take a harrowing turn, forever altering the course of their lives. As the two brothers trekked through the woods, they tracked a white-tailed deer near a steep ridge. It was a familiar pastime that had been part of their upbringing, sharing laughter and stories in the wild. However, the tranquility of nature was shattered when disaster struck. In a tragic misstep, Raymond lost his footing and plunged off the ridge into a dark, shadowy canyon below. Oscar was horrified. He peered over the edge, desperately calling out to his brother. But the canyon was a treacherous labyrinth, and Raymond was nowhere to be found. Panicked yet resolute, Oscar hastily set off to find help, racing against time, to bring his brother back to safety. When Oscar returned with local rescue teams, hope still flickered in their hearts. But as the search efforts began, they faced an unnerving dilemma. Despite climbing through the rugged terrain of the canyon and calling for Raymond, all they found was a haunting silence and his rifle lying alone on the forest floor. The deeper they searched, the more unsettling the situation became. Adding to the mystery, an eerie discovery was made. Strange three-toed tracks were found around the area. The local residents, already intrigued and unsettled by the wilderness, speculated wildly. Could these tracks have been left by an unknown creature? Were they connected to Raymond's disappearance, or simply an odd anomaly of the forest? As parents and children spoke in hushed whispers about the three-toed beast lurking in the woods, the narrative began to shift from one of simple tragedy to an inexplicable mystery. Despite extensive search efforts that lasted days and weeks, no trace of Raymond was ever found. The community, which had once been filled with hope, now found itself shrouded in sorrow and unanswered questions. Oscar, too, wrestled with loss. Each time he visited the woods, memories flooded back, a painful reminder what had been torn away. As years turned into decades, the story of Raymond Mills transformed from a family tragedy into a local legend. The ghost of the young man lost to a canyon haunted not just the Mills family, but the collective memory of Texarkana. The tale sparked conversations at gatherings, a mixture of sorrow, disbelief, and speculation. Was Raymond taken by the wilderness, or something more sinister? The three-toed tracks became a point of intrigue, shrouded in local lore, evocative of cryptids and folklore, drawing curious visitors to the area. Although Oscar Mills found his way back home from the battlefield, the scars of that hunting trip near Dirks Lake remained a poignant reminder of the fragility of life, family bonds, and the enduring search for answers in the face of profound uncertainty. Today, the Mills family seeks solace in the hope that one day Raymond will be found, and the mystery of his disappearance will be unraveled. But for now, it remains an enigmatic chapter in Texarkana history, a tale interwoven with remembrance, love, and the wonders that nature often hides. With a little over 9,000 square miles, Vermont is the 8th smallest state in North America, but makes up over 4.5 million acres of forest. This includes the beautiful Green Mountains, with their stunning landscapes, dense forests, and intricate trails, evoking a sense of tranquility and adventure. However, beneath the veneer of serene beauty lies a terrifying narrative, filled with mystery and unanswered questions. The disappearance of a man whose fate remains unknown. On August 16, 1997, 68-year-old Tom Avery, a retired post office manager, an avid hiker, and nature enthusiast, embarked on a solo trek into the heart of the Green Mountains. Friends and family knew him as a dependable family man with a deep-seated faith and love for the outdoors. As a native Vermonter, Tom was a seasoned adventurer who possessed extensive knowledge of the area, weather patterns, and hiking safety. He had planned a weekend camping getaway with a family friend, Fred Mayfer, on 3 familiar trails he had hiked before inside of the Mount Mansfield State Forest. Mount Mansfield is known for its face-shaped peaks which can be seen from a distance. Tom intended to hike the Hellbrook Trail, a 3.5-mile loop considered to be a challenging route to the chin of Mount Mansfield. And the next day, he would hike the Bruce Trail and Smuggler's Notch trails. But on the morning of the 16th, Fred canceled at the last minute due to chronic diverticulitis. But Tom's excitement didn't deter him from his plans and was confident about the trip, having traveled to the area many times. His wife, Mary, encouraged him to postpone the trip because she didn't feel comfortable of him going alone. However, Mary stated Tom was highly driven and wouldn't back down from a challenge. Tom assured his wife he would have plenty of food, water, and would take his trail map and compass along. Tom packed his gear in his 1993 gray Ford Taurus, kissed his wife, and drove the 2.5 hours to Mount Mansfield from his home in Chester. As he drove through Vermont's capital, Montpelier, he noticed quite a storm coming from the north. Unpredictable weather patterns are common near the Green Mountains, so this was not completely unexpected. It is believed that Tom pivoted from his original plan and decided to start his hike at Smuggler's Notch, which was the location he was originally going to conclude his trip. This turn of events is what set into motion one of the most bizarre missing person cases in North America. Mary Avery became concerned when Tom didn't return on the morning of the 18th. Around 2 p.m., she called local law enforcement. Tom's absence quickly raised alarm. The police launched an extensive search operation, enlisting local law enforcement, volunteers, and search and rescue teams, totaling over 750 people. Authorities were able to quickly identify Tom's 1993 gray Ford Taurus at the Smuggler's Notch trailhead, which contained his wallet and trail map with markings of his planned route. The following narrative was put together by investigators, along with some speculation. According to Tom's plans, Smuggler's Notch was indeed going to be the tail end of his trip. Authorities wondered if he had changed his mind at the last minute due to the storm. Oddly, his keys were discovered on the ground just under the driver's side door. Tom's wife, Mary, stated that he was a very meticulous person, having worked the postal system, and that, along with his change of plans, dropping his keys and leaving his trail map was way out of character. This left many scratching their heads, asking the question as to why something so obvious as his map would be disregarded. It is believed, since Tom reversed his trip, he was in a hurry and was concerned with the approaching storm, and simply left his car hastily toward the clearly defined path. SAR teams scoured the trails, combing through the dense underbrush, attempting to retrace his steps. Helicopters hovered above, and trained dogs were deployed in the hope of picking up his scent, but the dense forest offered little evidence of Tom's whereabouts. Like many missing persons cases, canines failed to pick up any leads. Later that evening, search teams faced challenges, including sudden thunderstorms and fog that rolled in, obscuring visibility. The case drew not only local attention but also captured national headlines. Days later, a young couple named Jesse Moore and Sienna Martinez came forward and told authorities they were hiking Smuggler's Notch on August 17th, and that they did see a man they believed to have been Tom. They stated the man appeared to be in good spirits, but did seem in a hurry. They asked him to take a photo of them, and he did oblige. Before they parted ways, the man asked if they knew of a good place to make camp. Unfortunately, they didn't. Jesse and Sienna thanked him for the photo and watched him turn and continue up the trail. Searches continued fruitlessly, as the hope of finding Tom began to wane. However, on October 21st, the situation took a turn when investigators discovered Tom's abandoned gear 2.5 miles off of the long trail of Mount Mansfield. His tent and backpack were found undisturbed, but animals had gotten to his food and other supplies. One troubling detail that stood out was that Tom's hiking boots were left near his tent. Local trackers identified what they believed were Tom's footprints in and around the campsite, but seemed to reveal Tom was wandering. This had many asking the questions. Did he get up in the middle of the night to relieve himself, wander too far and, due to the darkness, not be able to find his way back? Did he encounter an emergency and retreat quickly? And why would he leave his boots behind? With these questions unanswered, local lore about the mountains began to resurface. Stories were shared about hikers who had previously vanished in the area, some confounding experts with their inexplicable lack of evidence. The Green Mountains, while popular among outdoor enthusiasts, have a history of unexplainable disappearances which have led to speculation. Some locals whispered about hidden and unexplored caverns, while others suggested the existence of malevolent forces that might draw unsuspecting hikers into the wilderness. One popular theory was that of the Bennington monster, a long-believed cryptid described as a large, Bigfoot or dogman-like creature with black hair, standing over 7 feet tall, said to roam the Bennington Triangle, a phrase coined by American author Joseph Citro to denote an area of southwestern Vermont, the location where 4 people disappeared in the 1940s and 50s, namely near the mountains of Glastonbury. The first of these in the Bennington Triangle involved Riley Madden, a 73-year-old experienced hunting guide. In October 1945, Madden led a group of 4 hunters near Glastonbury Mountain. During the excursion, Madden became separated from the group. He was never seen again. Despite extensive searches by law enforcement and volunteers, no trace of Madden was ever found. Just 1 year later, in the winter of 1946, a 19-year-old college student named Wendy Gale vanished while hiking the Long Trail near Glastonbury Mountain. This is the southern portion of the Long Trail in which Tom Avery was planning to hike. Gale had informed her roommate that she intended to go for a short hike, but she never returned. The subsequent search involved hundreds of volunteers, including military personnel, but no evidence was ever discovered. Gale's disappearance remains one of the most puzzling cases in the region's history. Another mystifying incident within the Bennington Triangle that gained significant attention involved the disappearance of 5-year-old Johnny Burkett. On October 11, 1950, Johnny vanished from his family's Glastonbury farmhouse. A massive search involving the Vermont State Police and the U.S. Army was launched. It was reported that a motorist spotted a young boy matching Johnny's description walking along the roadside, but the claim was never substantiated. The disappearance of Johnny Burkett added to the haunting mystique of the Bennington Triangle. The final victim of the Bennington Triangle was 23-year-old Frances Littmeyer, which could be the most perplexing of the 5 cases, disappeared on October 28, 1950, only 16 days after young Johnny Burkett. While camping near the Somerset Reservoir, Frances and her cousin Hal Fuller went on a hike. Littmeyer ended up falling into a creek and needed a change of clothes. She told her cousin she would go back to camp, change, and promptly return, but she never did. Despite extensive search efforts involving multiple people, she could not be found. However, this case would prove to have a different outcome compared to the previous disappearances in the area. On May 15, 1951, over 6 months after Littmeyer's disappearance, a skeletonized body was discovered 3.5 miles away from the family's campsite. The remains were positively identified as those of Frances Littmeyer. A chilling detail was the position of the remains. The skull and torso were buried in a hole, and the pelvis and legs were exposed, yet both feet were missing. Due to their deteriorated state, the cause of death remained undetermined. Sources say she may have fallen into the hole, while others suggest she was placed there. Although the Bennington Triangle harbored mysterious disappearances in the early 19th century, there had not been a case like Frances Littmeyer's since. Most locals suggest that the Bennington monster is just a scary bedtime story, meant to keep children close when the sun goes down. However, there have been sightings of the creature as recent as 2003 near Route 7 in the area of Ferrisburg. Some argue that the Bennington monster had not been reported in the northern part of the Green Mountains, where Tom Avery had gone missing. But cryptozoologists suggest it could have migrated due to food and water sources, an unsettling notion in an otherwise peaceful landscape. The search for Tom Avery concluded after several weeks without a trace, and as winter approached, the hope of locating Tom was becoming far less likely. SAR teams dwindled and resources became less prevalent, as state and local costs reached over $500,000. The case became a source of collective speculation in the local community. News outlets buzzed with new theories and ideas. Many hoped more clues would emerge, while others connected similar cases to posit that something darker was at play. The family, unfortunately, was left grappling with a profound sense of loss and confusion. Then, on November 29, 1997, a local fly fisherman made a grisly discovery near the Seymour River. Tom's skeletal remains were found slumped and hanging 10 feet up a hemlock tree. When authorities investigated the scene, Tom's mostly decomposed remains were still inside his clothing. His compass was inside of his trousers and was discovered to be off about 10 degrees. Some passed it off as a defective compass, while others determined that nearby granite boulders could cause the discrepancy. More disturbing still, like the case of Francis Littmeyer, investigators didn't find any foot bones below Tom's torn trousers. The county coroner's office determined that Tom died of natural causes, but regarding the missing feet, animal predation was the assumption, due to the gnaw marks at the base of the tibias. But they failed to determine what kind of animal was responsible. A bear, mountain lion, or something else. Curiously, Tom's remains were discovered about 100 miles north from where Francis Littmeyer's were found. Did Tom become disoriented in the middle of the night? Was he lured away from his camp by another hiker with ill intent? Did something in the cover of darkness startle him, causing him to flee his campsite and go into hiding, further leading him to becoming lost? And why did Tom climb into a hemlock tree? Despite these questions, Tom Avery's disappearance remains an unresolved mystery, echoing through the valleys of the Green Mountains. His story is a haunting reminder of the powerful forces of nature, the risks of the great outdoors, and the unpredictability of life itself. As new hikers continue to explore the verdant trails, Tom's spirit follows in the whispers of the wind, reminding those who tread on the mountains to honor their surroundings and respect the wilderness, ever mindful of its beauty and its dangers. As each year passes without answers, the yearning for resolution remains palpable among Tom's family, as well as others whose loved ones have gone missing, holding on to hope that one day the mountains will yield the secrets they hold, allowing all of us to find some semblance of closure. If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel, give it a like, a comment, and maybe a share. But if you didn't like the stories, maybe share it with someone you don't like. In any case, I'm glad you stuck around to the end.